Honorable members, please be reminded that the question is that this Honorable House of Assembly do adopt the report of the Standing Finance Committee on the estimates of expenditure for the financial year 2021-2022 in the sum of $1,648,600,900 as a charge against the consolidated fund and other funds of the state of St. Lucia. Member for Denrinoff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the people of Tamazo, Fournier, Alemon, Dubonnet, Montpanache, Montpaille, Lower Grand Ravine, La Belleville, New Village, and Richmond, La Pelle, Anna Patat, La Rissus, Antilla Rissus, Gadet, Antigadet, Despin, Montfoin, Laride, Sedini, New Jack, and Montego Bay, Belmont and Varsity, Austin Hill, Montpanache, Babawa, and Mr. Speaker, for the 10th time in as many years, I rise on behalf of the people in a little enclave known as Fomawicent in Denier Riviere, where I grew up and where I live. Mr. Speaker, it is on behalf of the people of the communities that I've just mentioned that I rise to make a contribution to the debate on the estimates for 2021-2022. The communities I've mentioned, Mr. Speaker, when grouped together for election and electoral purposes, are ascribed the collective label Denry North. And it is on their behalf, Mr. Speaker, that I stand to be a voice of advocacy and a voice of reason. Soon from today, Mr. Speaker, our country will be going to the polls. And in much the same way they did in 2011 and 2016, they have pledged in the majority to once again repose their confidence in Sean Edward to be the parliamentary representative for Denry North and parts of the Mabuya Valley. And so today, Mr. Speaker, I feel duty-bound to express my gratitude to the people of Denry North. Mr. Speaker, je vais prendre l'occasion pour remercier Jean Denry North, Jean-Gouin-Rivière, Wifon-Gouavine, La Pelle, La Ressource, Gadet, Olion, Despin, Belmont, et puis Denry Rivière. Pour remercier eux pour si pour eux, j'ai pour dernier 10 l'année, ça moi j'ai venu ici et puis qu'a parler bayo et puis parler de bail qui affecté yo comme membre parlement pour Denry North. But Mr. Speaker, before I move on to the substantive matter before the House, with your indulgence and that of my parliamentary colleagues on both sides, I want to reach out to a friend and a fellow candidate of the St. Lucia Labour Party in the person of Jeremiah Norbert, SLP endorsed candidate for Miku North, who, as you know, Mr. Speaker, and members of the House would know, as would the entire nation, that the brother was involved in a very unfortunate accident a few weeks ago. But thankfully, he is recovering nicely in Martinique. He's in good spirits, and on behalf of the people of Denry North, I want to wish him a speedy recovery. Quickly, Mr. Speaker, I will mention a next-door neighbor in the person of Dexter who had surgery just a couple days ago. He too is recovering nicely. And we have a lot of persons in constituency who have not been well of late. And I want to profit the opportunity, as I said, with your indulgence, to wish them a very speedy recovery. Mr. Speaker, another financial year, another set of estimates, another national budget. This time to the tune of $1,638,600,000 Mr. Speaker, I must, as the parliamentary rep for Dennery North, ask a few questions. What is in this year's estimates for the people of Dennery North? What should the people of Dennery North expect with a budget of $1.6 billion? Est-ce et puis un budget neuf qu'au gouvernement y plan pour dépenser $1.6 billion? Est-ce nous avons un soulagement les l'agence a tapé dépenser by Jean en constituency et puis Jean cette liste entièrement? I recall last year, Mr. Speaker, while debating the estimates, and in the build-up to the budgetary process, so convinced was I at the time that the general election was near. And so I tried as much as possible to liken this term of government to the life of an average secondary school child. In here, I said, Mr. Speaker, last year, that some students, they go into the secondary school program where they spend 5 years, they waste time, and when the 5th year creeps up on them, Mr. Speaker, with nothing to show, they get a burst of enthusiasm and energy to do the work in 1 year that they were not able to do in 5 years. This, Mr. Speaker, is the best illustration I can find to speak to the performance and the disposition of this government after 5 years. The returns, based on what we see in the estimates, have been dismal. Wasted time. A tenure that lacked focus. Misguided priorities. And the government has run out of time. And in a desperate attempt, Mr. Speaker, to salvage a performance and face, things are being attempted overnight. Things that could not have been done in 5 years, all of a sudden you expect them to be realizable in 1 year. The government has run out of time. Mr. Speaker, with the estimates before us, we are looking at $1.6 billion. This is the 5th time since the general election of 2016 that a member from Mikud South, Minister for Finance and Prime Minister, would be coming to the Parliament with a set of estimates. In 2017-2018, Mr. Speaker, he presided over a budget, or he presented to this honorable House, a budget of $1,513,652,200. The following year, 2018-2019, he presented in this House a budget of $1,487,583,200. That was followed, Mr. Speaker, in 2019-2020 by $1,591,589,000. 2020-2021, $1.6 billion. And in 2021-2022, today, Mr. Speaker, before us, we have a budget of $1.6 billion. A total of $7.9 billion having been brought into this honorable House by way of estimates of money to be spent for the advancement of our country. And as the figures are presented, Mr. Speaker, or as the figures were presented, the Prime Minister attempted to give cursory explanations of the different programs contained in this year's estimates. What he said was uninspiring. No sector, Mr. Speaker, based on their pronouncements subsequent to the estimates having been presented, was inspired. The bus drivers are not inspired by what is before us. The farmers have not been inspired, and if the Prime Minister did not do sufficient to inspire them, Mr. Speaker, I was hoping that the inspiration for farmers would have come from the presentation made by the member for Babono, who has ministerial responsibility for agriculture. Same story. I did not see a single line item, or there isn't a single line item in the estimates that speaks to the fisher folk of this country. Maybe I missed it, Mr. Speaker. The little shop owners, Mr. Speaker, have not been inspired. And for 5 years, since the 6th of June, 2016, as I said, almost $10 billion having been presided over. Is St. Lucia a better place for it? Is the life of the average person in Oli or Gardet, Lapel, Richford, Grand Riviere, and Denier Riviere, Grand Ravine, better for it? Mr. Speaker, I do not have confidence that the estimates as presented by the Honorable Prime Minister and member for Miku South will give birth to anything different from what we've witnessed from this government in the last 5 years. Mr. Speaker, permit me to reference Head 41, Department of Agriculture, Fisheries, Natural Resources, and Cooperatives. With a recurrent allocation of $28,505,400 and a capital allocation of $29,407,800, giving that agency a grand total of $57.9 million. What should I expect on behalf of the farmers of this country? What is the state of the agriculture sector today? What can we expect from $57.9 million allocated to the agriculture sector, Mr. Speaker? What will be different from the abject failures of the past 5 years? Since this administration came into office, Mr. Speaker, the 5th budget, and in much the same way, I presented the figures leading to today's debate. Permit me to do the same, Mr. Speaker, for Head 41. In 2017-2018, $70.1 million for the agency, Agriculture, Fisheries, Natural Resources, and Cooperatives. In 2018-2019, $47.9 million. In 2019-2020, $53 million. In 2020-21, $56 million. And this year, Mr. Speaker, the ministry or the department has been allocated $57.9 million. In the 5 budgets that this administration has presided over, the ministry or the Department of Agriculture, Fisheries, Natural Resources, and Cooperatives has been allocated $285.7 million. Pour 5 années, le gouvernement a tapé koy en office depuis qu'il y a eu élection. Il a déjà venu au Parlement 5 fois, 4 avant le Premier ministre a présenté estimates là hier. Écoutez ça, Mr. Speaker. Département agricole, pêche et puis bagaille comme ça, j'ai joint $285.7 millions. Et nous avons des questions. Est-ce que le secteur agricole, après toute l'argent que j'ai dépensé, dans plus mais l'État, actuellement, parce que les nous allons au gouvernement le 6 juin 2016. Mr. Speaker, my intention is never to make any minister look bad. And if I raise my voice, it is because of the passion with which I speak on behalf of the people whom I represent. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Agriculture and member for Babono, he spoke before me, and he mentioned almost every program that is itemized under the Department of Government for which he has ministerial responsibility. But I noticed when it was time to speak about the banana industry, he lost his enthusiasm. And his tone was tantamount to that of someone who had been given responsibility for the midday obituaries on national radio or television. Solemn, uninspiring, calm, and in the 15 or so, 11 minutes, based on my watch, that he spent speaking of bananas, Mr. Speaker, I did not hear anything coming from him that would have provided some respite or some soulagement for the banana farmers of this country. Mr. Speaker, still on the head 41, line item, Banana Productivity Improvement Project. That particular line item, Mr. Speaker, has been allotted $2.6 million. And most of that money, as has been the custom in the last few years, would go to remuneration of the people who worked with that particular agency and support personnel. Gouvernement jamais été en budget là pour l'année ça là. $2.6 millions pour abattre ça fait figue en pays cette ici. Et pour un ministre, et bien un département gouvernement, qui n'y 57 millions $, $57.9 million, ou qu'à seulement mettre 2.6 millions pour ça fait figue. Et que 2.6 millions ça là, en chaque l'argent ça ni pour aller pour payer moun qui travaille en agency figue. So qui manière ou qu'à ça va battre situation live spot et puis tout l'autre problème femme figue. Mr. Speaker, last year, speaking to the estimates, I said that the allocation for the Banana Productivity Improvement Project was grossly insufficient and not commensurate with the challenges of this industry. With $2.6 million on the head 41 of this year, Mr. Speaker, that amount cannot realistically address the plight of the banana farmer in this country. The industry is in its worst state. That is the worst it has been in the last 20 years. Ça c'est plus dernier degré industrie figue j'attrape koi, un dernier 20 ans moun ka planter figue. And in the last 5 years, this is the second lowest allocation that we have seen for the banana industry. Écoutez quoi that à même l'air industriel en privé condition, c'est le gouvernement qui a mis plus l'argent. The only time in the last 5 years when more or less was allocated, to the banana program was in 2020-2021 when 2.5 million was allocated. So, Mr. Speaker, if the government had a true appreciation of the plight of banana farmers and the situation that confronts the industry, there would have been a bigger allocation to see a bigger effort to address the problems of the banana industry. And I will say, as I have said before, Mr. Speaker, that when you have a thriving banana industry, my constituency is a better place. St. Lucia is a better place. The rural economy in those little pockets are better communities, and the families are better off for it. There are still many families that rely on banana production, Mr. Speaker, as a form of livelihood. And when the pronouncement was made, I, Mr. Speaker, was hopeful that we would have been able to secure a market. But with that amount quoted here today, 2.6 million, that cannot be sufficient to address all of what the minister mentioned or outlined during his presentation, and at the same time try and secure markets with $2.6 million. A paltry amount, grossly insufficient, Mr. Speaker. We all know of the contribution of that industry to the development of this country. Ek nou sav sa en place Koden Rinoff, ek Jean Babono sav sa, ek Jean Vieux Noff sav sa, Jean Ozo sav sa. Se fig ki tiye, paye ale kay moun ko gwa maman mwen, ek mette galvanize. Fig vwe Adanou University, Mr. Speaker. Jodi a only each farmer can teach a tertiary level institutions. Can head key département en gouvernement. Et moi dit, même si FIG passe ça, ITE, en commettant qui passe, là, still ni un gros rôle pour FIG jouer en développement commune, especially ces communes qui dans ville. Mr. Speaker, I don't expect the banana industry to return to the commanding heights of our economy. And I will never try to pit agriculture against tourism, as was being indicated this morning. But Mr. Speaker, that amount as presented, 2.6 on the head 41, line item, banana productivity improvement project, that will not give our farmers any kind of soulagement as it relates to the development of our countries. Mr. Speaker, still on the head 41, I perused the estimates from table of contents to the appendix, and I did not see fisheries mentioned at all. What should the fishers of this country expect with a budget in excess of $1 billion? Not a solitary mention of the fisher folk in the estimates that we are debating today. With a closed fish marketing corporation and fishers having to be on the road late night, Mr. Speaker, what do we say to our constituents who have a vested interest in that particular subsector? What do you say to Jimo and Baba, Nixon, Fouchette, Koch, Michel on the Daito? When they come and they ask, what is in the estimates, and I carry my copy with me, absolutely no mention of the fisher folk. Pêcher, pas ouais, la pas ni rien, moi j'ai un estimate ça là, qui a bail soulagement pour ces pêcheurs pays nous, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, permit me to move on to head 56 of the estimates. Department of Economic Development, Transport and Civil Aviation. A recurrent allocation of $23.5 million and a capital allocation of $40.6 million. Giving that particular agency a grand total of $64.2 million. Mr. Speaker, of particular interest to me and the people of Dennery North, whom I represent in this House, is the line item Constituency Development Program, otherwise known as CDP. In the 5 estimates that have been presented in this Honorable House, the Constituency Development Program, as a program within the Agency of Economic Development, Transport and Civil Aviation, has been allocated the following amounts. 2017-2018, $19.1 million. 2018-2019, $18.6 million. 2019-2020, $10.6 million. 2020-2021, $17.6 million. And this year, Mr. Speaker, the CDP, or Constituency Development Program, excellent program initiated by a former UWP administration, has been allocated $10.6 million. Mr. Speaker, in the 5 years, the CDP program housed or accounted for on the head 56 of the estimates has been allocated $76.7 million. Mr. Speaker, I'm already saying Constituency Development Program, programme que le gouvernement Taïwan a baillé ici l'argent pour faire petit projet en toute constituency. En 5 années depuis le gouvernement Flambeau venu en pouvoir. Programme ça, j'ai tapé plus que 76 millions de dollars pour faire projet en community tout bâton cette ici. Et dis-moi ça là, Mr. Speaker. Là, nous 6 qui ont les façades opposition. Pas un projet, nous pièces, chaque j'ai tapé pour faire un bas programme ça là. Tous ces programmes ça là, j'ai fait, Mr. Speaker, seulement par membres qui ont représenté le gouvernement ça là en pouvoir. Et nous avons dit, Mr. Speaker, that cannot be right. And Mr. Speaker, there are members on the other side who agree with us that this is not right. That the amount on the head 56 for Constituency Development Program has to be shared, Mr. Speaker, in such a way that members on both sides of the House would get to preside over development initiatives in their constituencies. And when we were on the other side of this parliamentary divide, this is not how it was done, Mr. Speaker. But today, Mr. Speaker, you lost. You lost. You didn't win, so you won't know anything about that. You were beaten in Soufrière. The member for Denry South can attest to that he presided over projects in his constituency. And here's the member for Miku Fruyu, Mr. Speaker, Miku North. She too will admit that when the St. Lucia Labour Party, and I'm prepared to yield to her on a point of order, for her to stand in this house and tell the people of St. Lucia that she did not preside over constituency development projects in her constituency when she was in opposition. And I will challenge the member for Castries North to do the same. I am prepared to yield if they can stand on a point of order and tell me the information I'm providing is inaccurate. Mr. Speaker, between 2011 and 2016, every elected MP in St. Lucia presided over CDP projects. But today, after 5 years, when we are busy building a new St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, $76.7 million of CDP, we cannot, Mr. Speaker, preside over a single project in constituency where we can bring relief and assistance to the people who repose their confidence in us and give us a mandate to come in here and speak on their behalf. Still, on the line item, Constituency Development Program, Mr. Speaker, Head 56. When they came in, the Alemon Road in Grand Riviere, the contracts were already prepared and signed. It wasn't a case where they had to be costed, Mr. Speaker, or bills of quantities had to be prepared. They were signed. They never honored the contract. $70-odd million. And the people cannot get their road up to a day like today. But if elections on the horizon, you'll hear about Kudme. You will see people carrying blocks. Is that what the people of Denry North and Alemon are worth, Mr. Speaker? Can they not expect, Mr. Speaker, their share of the pie as taxpayers? We tackled that particular road under the CDP, phase 1, from the highway right up to June. And contracts were signed from June to Wayne, otherwise known as ICE. Cosmos, Apa Yellow, Morena, Credential, Donet, Marubes, Bam, Jeanette, all the people who live in that area had expectations that they were going to get a new road because the contracts were already signed. 5 years later, Mr. Speaker, nothing has been done, Mr. Speaker. Nothing has been done on this road. But you're resorting to a Kudme approach when in the next door or neighboring constituency, DVRP, Plainfield upgraded Lakai, Denry South, Bolo Bell, Bois Joli, but you want the people of Alemon in Denry North, because they voted for the St. Lucia Labour Party in the majority, to resort to a Kudme. The day will soon come, Mr. Speaker, when they will give expressions in the ballot box. Mr. Speaker, still on the Constituency Development Program, like the road in Alemon, Austin Hill, the contracts were signed. Phase 1 was done, and the remaining phases, Mr. Speaker, we will advance. Contracts were already signed. Again, that was stopped because in Austin Hill, they vote in the majority for Sean Edward and the St. Lucia Labour Party. So that today, people like Jupi, Darren, Eric and his family, Matthew, Matida, George, Noella, Werner, Hayden, Roderick, Rivi, Aidan, Kedan, and all of them, Mr. Speaker, I have said to them that they just need to be a little patient. The road will come. Because this United Workers' Party government will not be the ones presiding over the budget that they are passing in this honorable house at this sitting. We will, with the amount allocated, the 10 million allocated, Mr. Speaker, Alemon and all the other parts of constituency will finally see the realization of the projects that we had previously identified, because there will be a change at the head of the ship of state. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn my attention to head 52. The department is Education, Innovation, and Gender Relations. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I see you glance at your book. Head 52. Been allocated a recurrent amount of $209 million, or $209.6 million. A capital allocation of $27.4 million. Giving them a grand total of $247 million for this financial year. I would have been happy, Mr. Speaker, to speak to several of the line items under this particular department, or this particular head. But today I will confine myself to speak only to the e-books program as contained in this year's budget. $6.8 million. The Ministry or the Department of Education, Innovation, and Gender Relations, in a 5-year period, has been allocated by this Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, and by extension, this government, the whopping amount of $1.03 billion. Mr. Speaker. Députant parti Flabovini à gouvernement. Département éducation, innovation et puis ça fait gender. J'ai joint un budget pour 5 années, gouvernement Flambeau j'ai amené un budget en caille consiste. 1.03 pas million de dollars, billion dollars. And Mr. Speaker, you would have thought that with that quantum having been allocated to the agency, today, the children of St. Lucia would not be scrambling all over the place for smart devices. But we come with 6.8 million as a line item, and we are promising that we will be giving children e-books. Mr. Speaker, if this government, in the interest of the children of St. Lucia, can tomorrow morning procure smart devices for every single child in this country, I would support them, Mr. Speaker. But they played politics with that. And there are times, and I've made the point before, government and governance has to be a continuum. It cannot be a case where every time the government changes, everything must be brought to a halt, and then people suffer. There are areas where you have to allow certain programs to roll out. And Mr. Speaker, I am sure that the government today is regretting having stopped the laptop program. And whether you call it laptop or you call it e-books, the point that is being underscored here, moving forward, Mr. Speaker, is that our children, in order for them to be competitive on a global level, they must be in a position where they can access smart devices. And he said, and you hear this, the Prime Minister tell it's not the same. And we can stand here and debate all day e-books versus laptop computers. Mr. Speaker, what is important is that when the St. Lucia Labour Party was in government, there was a recognition of a need to incorporate technology in education service delivery. So that, Mr. Speaker, every child, whether your parents were rich or poor, you would have been able over time to access a smart device to give you a competitive advantage. So that the child who comes from the family that is affluent would not have been in a superior position than a child whose parents cannot afford. That is the gap that we were trying to close. But Jordia, personne pas de savent de COVID. Pour parents qui viennent la caille, MPs et puis l'autre monde dans la société qui a demandé yo. Est-ce que vous avez une pièce de laptop pour servir pour bailler ishmael? Si maman moi propose à faire SBA because you don't need devices, Mr. Speaker. $6.8 million in this year's budget to procure e-books. It represents a start, but is that too little, too late? How many children will benefit from that, Mr. Speaker? We should not have been in that situation today. And in as much as we did not foresee the challenges of COVID in relation to instruction delivery and pedagogical matters in education, had the program been allowed to continue, Mr. Speaker, this is not where we would have found ourselves. $6.8 million. E-book program is supposed to solve that problem. And I know, first then, Mr. Speaker, what technology in education and the school system can do. I spent 6 years at the Clinton Mason Secondary School. I taught all the computer-related subjects, IT, EDPM. When CXC transitioned from a paper-based registration program, I presided over the introduction of the electronic registration system. And at that school, we had one lab with 25 computers. And every single child at the school was enrolled in the IT program. You know why? Because we had a philosophy at the school. And I've said it here before, your ability to use the technology is tantamount to you being able to tell the time. But it was not enough, the 40 minutes in the lab. You needed a device to take home to ensure continuity and reinforcement of in-class concepts. That is how you move, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 40 computers in a lab for 500 children. There was a case for procurement of laptop and smart devices. But today the argument is not whether we should have made devices available, but whether it should be e-books or laptop computers. That is the narrow path we want to take the argument. Mr. Speaker, permit me at this juncture to move to Head 53, Department of Wellness, Health and Wellness, Head 53. And if I have to sound or be repetitive and monotonous, you'll have to forgive me, Mr. Speaker. Recurrent allocation, $174.8 million. Capital allocation, $14.7 million. Giving the Department of Health and Wellness the very impressive total or allocation of $189.5 million. Mr. Speaker, am I to expect with that allocation, and I said it was Head 53, Mr. Speaker, to make sure I'm not mistaken, should I expect the reinstatement of the Larissus Health Center? Again, I went through every page of the estimates, looking for it as the line item it was in the budget of 2016-2017. It was a line item. It was a capital project for which grant funding provisions were made for grant funding. Jik toujours. Yotiye. But we've been there before. Mr. Speaker, in 2016-2017, this particular agency was allocated $146.05 million. And in that amount, there was a provision for the Larissus Health Center. And the retort has been, 5 years, Seklane, Ife, pour Gomun Gadet Belmont, Olio Despin. Try marcher pour aller gap là pour aller right pour aller oui fond. Because nous te la nous pas fait, et qu'on la la pas fait. But if that is the attitude and that is the disposition, Mr. Speaker, I am not as disheartened today as I would have been 2 years ago. And to quote you, Mr. Speaker, or should I say like you, I know the hour, and I think you said you know the times that we're in. To use the colloquial jargon of a fellow Caribbean country, The day soon come, Mr. Speaker. Soon come. I'm asking, Mr. Speaker, with the flexibility and the powers granted to him by this Finance Act, that the Prime Minister makes adjustments to the budget, Mr. Speaker, to make a case for the people of Denrinoff as it relates to the Larissos Health Center. Si c'est mon cas pigé pour Health Center because moi ka représenter ou moi c'est membre Labour Party. Continuez ka pini moi, mais moi Health Center ba c'est mon nom. Et si vous voulez faire un loi comme moi parler Health Center ça OK mais moi j'ai ba c'est quoi mon nom. Moi j'ai ba c'est mon nom. But moi voulais dire je Denrinoff. Poche. Pas taper comme top décomporté. La kay ni un jour qui ka venir tout de suite. Et même si vous back there, là, il y a un go trauma son there, vous pas ça back pour tout le temps. Et que jour à venir, co-élection qui a été écrite. Mr. Speaker, Head 46, the Department of Tourism, Broadcasting and Information, Culture and Creative Industries. Recurrent, $21.4 million. Capital, $14.5 million. The grand total of $35.9 million. Mr. Speaker, I did not see anything definitive in relation to the creative industries sector. But I'm hoping somewhere, even if I wasn't able to pick it out, that in that amount of $35.9 million, the young artists of Denrinoff, LT, Ampa, Mighty, Sebans, Colton, Kirtley and the others will be able to get some form of benefit from this program. Mr. Speaker, this is how Jamaica emerged to become what they are on the global music stage. Their young people and their artists were given avenues to express themselves. I'm hoping that whereas this will not take care of all our creative industries' needs, and whereas I'm only confining my contribution to this particular Head 46, to assistance for budding artists, there are a lot of other sectors subsectors within the creative industry sector, Mr. Speaker, that will be looking for assistance from this allocation. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am hoping that the artists that I've mentioned and others who are aspiring to use their creative talents to hopefully earn a livelihood one day will begin to find support in this. Nous n'y a shy jeune moun à Denrinoff et puis on cette ici qui est talent. Mais de là nous c'est un pays que les moun venir et qui dit nous jeunes moun yo voulez faire ci et yo savent ça. Nous pas jamais trop intéressé de là pour couper ça ni pour dire ça ni pour chanter. Et de laisser ça yo besoin from nous. C'est un petit support, un petit encouragement. Et moi crois that it be $45.9 million. En département gouvernement qu'on est creative industries, ces jeunes artistes là qui ont chanté et qui ont fait l'autre bagaille, qui ont qualifié comme creative industries, qui ont été aider à bas programme gouvernement ça là. Mr. Speaker, how much time do I have? Mr. Speaker, I want to move on to Head 46. There's nothing some of you would like to see more than me wrapping up. I still have 5 other heads.
17 minutes.
How much?
17 minutes.
70?
17.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department of Home Affairs and National Security. And security has been a talking point in this country for a while. And it is important, Mr. Speaker, for me to preface my comments, my contribution to Head 46 by saying, and it is something I've said, it's something that the leader of the opposition has said, it is something my colleagues on this side have always said and said consistently. No political party, no citizen benefits from lawlessness, criminality, and crime. Crime is our business. The 17 of us in here, we all have a responsibility to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that we conduct ourselves and we take on our responsibilities as elected men and women in such a way that the criminality that has spiraled out of control in this country is arrested, pardon the pun, and brought under control. Because nobody is immune. Nous, à l'ambassade, ça n'a pas jamais célébrer crime. Nous ne pouvons pas faire comme l'autre façade là, Mr. Speaker. Et venir et puis dire qu'il fait barrage avec blâmer l'autre monde pour crime. Et que les gens venir pour yo ou abattre une situation crime dans pays là. Yo pas savent quoi pour tourner. Qui yo savent quoi pour tourner? Qui yo pas savent quoi pour tourner? Nous tout capés pour lui. Si nous pas faire barrage et fait vitement. Home Affairs and National Security. A recurrent amount of $119.5 million, complemented by a capital amount of $7.89 million. Given that particular agency, Mr. Speaker, Head 46, Agency, Home Affairs and National Security, the quantum of $127.4 million. That, even if all of 127 million, if all that had to be assigned or allocated or directed to the efforts of the Royal Central Police Force, that would not have been sufficient to fight the crime situation, the lawlessness and criminality in our country today. So from that amount, the only line item I see there for the police is again the paltry amount of $2.3 million repairs to police facilities. The police are frontliners, as we've been able to categorize some of our public servants of late. And all the support they get, they deserve, and they need more. I'm hoping that from that $2.3 million for the repairs of police facilities, Mr. Speaker, that once and for all, the Southern Divisional Headquarters, which some persons might refer to as the Viewfort Police Station, the problems of that particular facility will be addressed once and for all, and that the police can utilize it. Because it provides a comfort level that is supposed to make them more efficient. There are issues at the Richmond Police Station in my constituency. And Mr. Speaker, coincidentally, the officer in charge happens to be in the chamber with us. This government facility resides within the confines of my constituency. I have seen firsthand how they have gone out in the last year. There may have been times when their approach had been questioned by constituents. But you know what should never be lost in this? Is the consistency and the dedication with which they've gone out to serve the people of that particular constituency. And of course, Richmond working in collaboration with the Dennery Police Station under the command of ASP Alexander. With $2.3 million to repair police facilities, I am hoping that some of the little attendant issues we have at the Richmond Police Station will be addressed. Mr. Speaker, it is not fair to ask citizens to make sacrifices on behalf of the country if we do not demonstrate as leaders that we are prepared to meet them halfway. The label frontline workers is not one that the police have a monopoly on. And in much the same way that I peruse the estimates, and more specifically Head 36, looking for allocations to address the issues of the Royal Central Police Force, I had to do the same on behalf of the hundreds of fire personnel who are serving this country every day, weekend to weekend, holidays, morning, noon, and night. And I have to say to them, through you, Mr. Speaker, and they too, when they have a chance, can look at the estimates and pay attention to Head 46. And all they will find in the estimates is a paltry $200,000 for repair to fire station and to provide general relief for firefighters in this country. Mr. Speaker, the firemen and firewomen of this country have made a lot of sacrifices. A lot of what I can say and need to say with respect to the fire personnel of this country would be better suited for the debate on the appropriation bill. But for too long, like the correctional officers, Mr. Speaker, they feel left out. And this is what they tell you in private conversations, that the police seem to be getting all the attention. And I will admit to them sometimes that the police has a more strenuous job to do than them. And that is not me in any way trying to sidestep or diminish the efforts that they make. But they're critical. I have seen men traverse the Bad Little 3, 4, 5 times in a night with that ambulance when duty calls, Mr. Speaker. And they do not flinch, they do not cower. They do it with pride and dignity. And I'm saying, when they see, and it's a very serious argument, you know, they look at the estimates. We almost have the same number of police fire stations as we do police stations. Fire stations, police station. Maybe there's just a slight difference. They have the same issues. They need the same comfort levels at work. And if you can find 2.3 million for the police, and I think the police deserve more, I do not believe, Mr. Speaker, 200,000 can resonate. Maybe there is something that the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance knows that we don't know. And I'm sure he'll probably provide clarification, Mr. Speaker, where that is concerned. Mr. Speaker, as I prepare to conclude my presentation, I want to invoke, yes, His Excellency. For I find the concluding lines of his throne speech 2021 to be so apt and so applicable to our situation in Dennery North and the Mabuya Valley. Mr. Speaker, the unassailable, unvarnished truth is that we in Dennery North are battle-scarred. Our lives and our constituency have been made to suffer by a wicked and uncaring government. We have been made to suffer immensely for our unequivocal support for Sean Edward and the St. Lucia Labour Party. But we are not defeated. We will not lie like dry bones on the floor of national politics. We will not be defined by the sufferings and victimization of the past 5 years. We are a resilient people. We are a hardworking people. We are a proud people. We are the lion-hearted people of the Mabuya Valley. Mr. Speaker, a people of unconquerable spirit. When the Prime Minister, as fidgety as he is in terms of announcing a date for a general election, whether he does it on a radio station that is pro his party, or he decides to do it in the parliament, or in an address to the nation, this will be the first step to redemption for the people of Dennery North who have not gotten their fair share of this national pie. Because, Mr. Speaker, in their majority, they continue to go to the 5 polling stations in Dennery North to repose their confidence in Sean Edward and the St. Lucia Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, I want to say finally to my people that hope is on the horizon. We were tried, but we did not break. We are still standing firm. And Mr. Speaker, when the ballots are counted on the night of election, and if there will be need for a recount, which I doubt very much in Dennery North, the St. Lucia Labour Party and Sean Edward will be standing tall with victory under our belts. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is my contribution to the debate on the estimates 2021-2022.
Member for Mekong North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't help but smile at the challenge to call it. I want to join in the calls to call it, because I know that this United Workers' Party will be returned to the helm of governance of this country. So indeed, call it. Call it. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I am afforded the distinct privilege to rise in this honorable House because of the explicit faith and confidence that the people of Micoud North have in my representation on behalf of themselves and their families. And I have every confidence, Mr. Speaker, because it's curious that even as we discuss the estimates, that there's so much conversation about the imminent election. But I have every confidence, Mr. Speaker, that St. Lucia, as well as the people of Micoud North, will do the right thing. And they will do the right thing because, as you've heard today and yesterday by my colleagues, or from my colleagues, the United Workers' Party, particularly this administration, in the last 12 months, we have proven our agility, wisdom, and care for the people of this country through the most trying times in this period. And I know that the people of St. Lucia will afford us another opportunity because they understand the foundation that we have built, and they understand, too, the importance of allowing us to build upon that strong foundation. And as we comb through the pages of this year's estimates, not only do we have the evidence of monies well spent, investments in the enhancement of infrastructure, health, social programs, and of course, combating COVID-19, but the projections suggest that we are poised to recover when COVID-19 would have been managed or brought under some level of control globally. So, Mr. Speaker, I rise to offer my support to this year's estimates of revenue and expenditure for the fiscal year 2021-22. And, Mr. Speaker, we have already established that these are very trying times, that COVID has brought with it unprecedented challenges, and I therefore wish to express my most profound gratitude to the many citizens who have worked tirelessly on the front lines and in the various sectors to ensure that COVID-19 did not wreak havoc in this country, that we tried our very best to minimize the impact of COVID-19. In this year's budget, as you know, which was done against the backdrop of significant erosion of previous economic gains and a dramatic decline in the tourism sector, which remains the mainstay of our national economy. And so, Mr. Speaker, it was no easy feat to infuse in this year's budget a healthy dose of hope anchored in the pragmatic economic reality, one which is still very fluid. But with the innovation, fiscal prudence, and responsible forecasting of this administration, we have much reason to believe that this country is poised to benefit from the global economic upturn as COVID-19 is brought under control, and thanks to a very effective vaccination program. Mr. Speaker, as this government continues to demonstrate that it cares about the holistic well-being of our citizens, permit me to begin by accentuating the details that appear on page 435, head 52, under ICT Integration Project, and line 0354, which presents a favorite topic of my colleagues opposite, on the e-books program. These programs, Mr. Speaker, total an investment, and I insist on investment, Mr. Speaker, because that is how we perceive the injection of finances in the social sector, that we perceive them as investments in the people, the young people, our students. And Mr. Speaker, you will see there over $10 million allocated. And that, in effect, will better prepare this nation's children to participate more meaningfully in the global knowledge economy by affording them a sound, relevant 21st century learning experience that embraces teaching and learning digital technologies and learning platforms. And I will not descend into a debate about the difference between a learn book and a laptop. I think that was very well established on the last occasion. That investment by this government, Mr. Speaker, recognizes, but more importantly, corrects the challenges that beset children who come from homes that are poor and cannot afford a digital device or do not have internet connectivity. Hence, that generous injection of financial resources to address these concerns amounting to over $12.6 million. Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to another component, another project within my ministry, entitled the St. Lucia Education Quality Improvement Project. We are earmarked to spend under head 52, line 0253 on page 418, a total of $19.6 million, again, to bring to the children of this nation, to make the necessary provision, whether it is by building new schools in Vidbutai, Lagay, and the Methodist School, and or investing in the retraining, retooling, and upskilling of our teachers by provision of scholarships overseas. That money, Mr. Speaker, is material evidence of the extent to which this government cares about the well-being of our students, where they are housed, how they are taught, what they are taught, and what methods are employed in the delivery of a relevant curriculum using state-of-the-art technologies. Very importantly, Mr. Speaker, the comprehensive nature of our education thrust and in ensuring that no child is left behind, adequate provision is also made for our children with special needs within this EQUIP project as well. Vidbutai, Lagay, and Methodist schools are catered for within that allocation. In fact, Mr. Speaker, construction is due to begin shortly as the contracts have been awarded to the respective contractors. So I expect to see that blocks will be going up pretty soon. Under head 52, line 0251, Mr. Speaker, you would have heard my colleagues reference the major investment that the government has made and continues to make in the rehabilitation and reconstruction of many of our schools, with 3 schools benefiting from entirely new wings. And I speak of Beanfield, Monrepo, Passias combined. And under the DVRP, on page 520, head 56, line 0080, under the DVRP, we have made accommodation for the construction of an entirely new wing at the Mikud Secondary School a project which started last year and is expected to be completed within the new financial year, this financial year, 2021-2022. Another very progressive ambition that has found expression in the St. Lucia Human Capital Resilience Project under Head 51, page 386, an interministerial project, Mr. Speaker, that brings together several agencies with novel ideas to address our human capital development needs. And as it pertains to our part in the Ministry of Education, I am duty-bound to highlight the component that speaks to the area of technical and vocational educational training. This is a 5-year project with about $10 million allocated to the social equity and $10 million to TVET. And this year, a total of approximately $4.6 million have been programmed for implementation within my ministry to address technical vocational education and training. Again, an investment, tangible and material investment in our young citizens. We will delve into that in greater detail during the policy debate. My colleague from Grosley, I imagine, will treat with the components of that project that is being championed by his ministry, the Ministry of Equity, Social Justice, Local Government, and Empowerment. Mr. Speaker, while my colleague from Babonneau has highlighted the investment being made in agriculture under Head 41, I just want to echo the excitement of farmers in Mico North, especially livestock farmers, and the anticipation of employment. A total of approximately $1.4 million have already been set aside for the completion of that project. Residents from Mico North are already benefiting from employment, but more importantly, I wish to focus on the programs, the livestock programs that will benefit farmers in the immediate vicinity. And Mr. Speaker, I can hardly wait for the completion of that project. So, Mr. Speaker, the relocation of the Boseju Agricultural Station, as I said, will not only generate jobs, but offer scope, greater scope to young farmers as we endeavor to sexy up agriculture, as we say in the sector, and hoping that we can attract some new blood, new innovation in the sector. And I really want to thank my colleague from Babonneau for that initiative and for making Mico North the preferred home for the agricultural station. Thank you so much for that. The people of Mico North and neighboring communities are very grateful. Mr. Speaker, our expression of care to ensure that we respond to the multiple needs of the people and positioning them to capitalize on and maximize the new technologies that are in existence and can bring reprieve to our people find expression under Head 22. There are 2 projects detailed there that touch lives very directly, Mr. Speaker. In an era of distributed learning, the government island-wide network, the GINet, has gained heightened and renewed relevance in bringing connectivity to communities around St. Lucia, especially in rural areas. The amount allocated this year amounts to over $2.2 million, touching lives in a very, very real way. The other projects, which have attracted an injection of roughly $6 million and $4 million respectively, mean a lot, Mr. Speaker, to a driver who can now walk up to the ICT center in Mico Village and renew his license, his driver's license online, touching lives in a very tangible, meaningful way. These programs or projects are namely the ICT Evolution, Building a Secure, Connected and Modern Government, and the Caribbean Digital Transformation Project, all of which are very well detailed on page 561 under Head 22. Mr. Speaker, if your kind permission, if I move to Head 43, page 571, the people of Mico North have every expectation that they will continue to benefit in the way that they have started to in Monrepo and Mico Village, and that projects on the St. Mary and Lapwet roads and the immediate vicinity will materialize in this financial year, thanks to the provision under Head 43 with respect to road rehabilitation and construction. Mr. Speaker, let me summarize some of the activities that are to be undertaken within the ministry. And I must say that work is possible only because of the hard-working, committed team that I have the distinct pleasure of working with or alongside. And I would have already referenced the EQUIP project and the schools earmarked to be constructed in this fiscal year. And Mr. Speaker, while you have heard that we have invested over $40 million in the rehabilitation of schools, given the already deplorable condition they were in when we came into office in 2016, our efforts continue unabated to ensure that the physical plant of schools, that these schools are student-friendly and fit for human habitation and occupation. Interestingly, under the Department of Sustainable Development and in collaboration with the sister department, Education, we have also sought to bring to the schools sustainable energy, and the pilot project, as indicated under Head 52, line 062, in the secondary schools, we have sustainable energy usage in schools. And that is, Mr. Speaker, in keeping with this government's commitment to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and to see how best we can inject renewable energy into the energy mix. You also see here, Mr. Speaker, at line 0353, the construction of a block at CARE. CARE is that institution that affords our students a second shot at a primary school education and ushering them more gently into a secondary and post-secondary school context. And I really want to applaud Dr. Mason and her team for the kind of work that they've been doing. And it's not surprising that the ILO and other agencies have found it very fitting to afford them that healthy injection of finances to build a block at their facility to accommodate more students. Similarly, under education, Mr. Speaker, under the SKY project, a project which is funded by the UK government, we continue to afford it there in the tune of $1.2 million and more, afford young adults a second shot at life, retooling, upskilling, responding to new and emerging opportunities in the labor market, and or equipping them to make an entry into the labor market. Many single mothers who were previously unemployed capitalize on this project. I'm so grateful that we can bring new hope to them. Again, a very tangible manifestation of the extent to which we care. The project which I referenced earlier on, which is an interagency, interministerial undertaking at line 0328, the St. Lucia Human Capital Resilience Project, as I indicated, has a healthy component this year that will deal with technical vocational education and training. Again, equipping our young people with very tangible skills, enhancing their employability so that they can either consider becoming young entrepreneurs or that they're better able to seek employment within the labor market. Continuing on page 585 under Head 52, Mr. Speaker, you will see the programs to which I had referred to earlier, these being the ICT Integration Project and the eBooks program, both of which, Mr. Speaker, are very much in line with our explicit vision to ensure that we afford solution students an education that is suitable for the 21st century, affords them exposure to and equipping them with some core competencies that will enhance their functionality in the labor market, not only here, but regionally and globally as well. Mr. Speaker, I cannot decline the opportunity, whenever it is afforded me, to express my gratitude to the government and people of Taiwan And at head 56, we see yet again the continuation of what we have dubbed the Constituency Development Program, a program without which, Mr. Speaker, we would not have seen the kind of very material, tangible, visible gains that we have made, especially at the community level. So, Mr. Speaker, the people of Miko North in particular remain very grateful for that partnership. And again, coming out of what was initially a $44 million project, we see that the continuation of that project in this fiscal year, I'm sure, is one that many residents do anticipate. Mr. Speaker, let me say that I understand and appreciate too well the sacrifices that our frontliners have made. And I know that even at a time when we have experienced such a significant economic downturn on account of COVID-19 and what that denotes for countries all over the world, that we must applaud the efforts of our uniformed services in particular, and that notwithstanding that we have not been able to honor all that they have requested, I am encouraged that we are at least able to meet some of their pressing needs, and in particular some of the equipment to the police that will allow them to better fight against what is evidently a creeping problem with crime and lawlessness in this country. So I want to applaud that effort on behalf of the Minister of Finance as well. Let me in closing say, Mr. Speaker, that notwithstanding what we see here denoted in dollars and cents, it really takes the human effort to make it possible. So we can forecast all the expenditure that we wish, and we can imagine and envisage all kinds of projects. But always, we are forever mindful that it is the Herculean effort of the Sanusian people, the public service, the civil society organizations that really bring to life what we have here in figures. So I want to lend my full support to this estimates of revenue and expenditure, and to say that I know that this was no easy feat given the economic challenges that we are confronted with. But I beg of us in our respective departments, ministries, and agencies that we dispatch with this, we dispense with this, we invest that money in such a way that the citizens of St. Lucia, wherever they may find themselves in this country, will benefit tremendously from what we're doing. Let me, if you would, to allow me, Mr. Speaker, express my condolences to the families who've lost loved ones because of COVID-19. In my own community, we've had a few losses as well. And so I wish to reassure the constituents of Miko North who have found themselves grieving that they are in my thoughts and prayers, and to join with my other colleagues in saying to the citizens of St. Lucia, let us do the right thing, let us do what is required, and only then will the numbers in here make sense. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Swazelle Saldivas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as is customary, when we come to the budget, I would always like to give thanks to the higher being for making me see another year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, while it's not every year that I give thanks every day. But whenever we come to this momentous occasion to present the work that this government continues to do, Mr. Speaker, I'm always thankful for the opportunity. Mr. Speaker, as we're on giving thanks, I want to take time to give thanks to the staff at the Ministry of Commerce, Mr. Speaker, my permanent secretary, and all the directors and the other line staff, Mr. Speaker, particularly for the last year, where the whole issue of uncertainty surrounding COVID, the fears of interacting with the public, and all the nervousness that existed, Mr. Speaker, they continued to perform exceptionally well under the circumstances, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank them for that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also want to thank the people of the community that I represent, Shows El Saltibus, for their continued confidence in my ability to serve and for already having given me the assurance that based on what has been done by my representation, I shall be well seated for the next general election. Mr. Speaker, I want to preface my contribution on an excerpt on a book, I think that was released yesterday by Pope Francis. And Mr. Speaker, in that book, there's some lines that caught my eye, particularly what I'm about to repeat. And I quote, and it says, "Let us all keep in mind that there is something worse than this crisis." And he speaks to the drama of wasting it. Let us all keep in mind that there is something worse than this crisis, and that is the drama of wasting it. And I find this so poignant, Mr. Speaker, because it reflects exactly on what this government is doing, Mr. Speaker. In this time of crisis, we are taking advantage of the quiet time, Mr. Speaker, and putting this country in a position that when this crisis is over, we will fly, we will soar, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, he goes on to say that we cannot emerge from the crisis the same as before. We either come out better or we come out worse. And I put it to the people of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. Based on this government's performance during this crisis, how do they believe we are going to come out? And I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, there will be a resounding, we will come out a better people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I support the motion before us. And you will note, Mr. Speaker, recurring the expenditure under the ministry that I represent and I oversee, Mr. Speaker, we have a figure of $9,027,600 recurrent expenditure for the period 2020-2021. Mr. Speaker, my ministry is not a ministry where we are a significant revenue earner. We are more a ministry that facilitates. And what we facilitate, Mr. Speaker, is significant to the country's growth and the country's entrepreneurship spirit, Mr. Speaker. And my tenure as a minister responsible, I am constantly reminded that in tough times, we fight back and move forward with shared determination, strength, and courage, no matter what. That is what the people of St. Lucia have demonstrated. Over the last 5 years, my ministry has recovered on bringing recovery from the void left behind by the previous administration. Our challenge as a ministry has been the creation of a business environment that fosters creativity and ingenuity, Mr. Speaker. I have witnessed attempts, I have witnessed moments where the ministry has stepped in not to supplant private enterprise, but to catalyze them, to create the conditions and enabling environment for entrepreneurship and for new business to adapt and ultimately to thrive. To achieve this, Mr. Speaker, we had to make some tough and in some cases, unpopular decisions. Based on our vision, and our vision as a government, we recognize the need for better infrastructure, Mr. Speaker. And that is why over the years, Mr. Speaker, particularly the last 2 years, we have embarked on major rehabilitations of roads, recognize what's happening with our health sector, our airport, Mr. Speaker, and we have done all of that to achieve our investment goals. And that goes right back, Mr. Speaker, to the quote that I spoke of earlier with regards to not wasting the opportunities that COVID presents. We also needed to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that the labor force was healthy and well protected through social safety nets. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, this government has continued to subsidize essential commodities such as flour and cooking gas. Mr. Speaker, I will attempt in my presentation to debunk a lot of what we hear on the other side as it relates to what is this government doing to people of certain classes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we believe that in order for our nation to thrive, there must not only be the right balance of private enterprise, trade, and investment, but also a regulatory structure, hence the legislative reforms that we have embarked upon. For too long, Mr. Speaker, we have witnessed efforts to solve tough problems fall prey to bad leadership, partisanship, and politics. I am delighted to share with my colleagues and all St. Lucians the achievements of my ministry during my tenure as minister with responsibility for commerce. And I also wish to thank, Mr. Speaker, the public sector stakeholders for their patience and partnership, which enabled us to record significant successes notwithstanding the unprecedented times. Mr. Speaker, I need to applaud the manufacturing sector. I need to applaud the manufacturing sector because of the resilience during the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw the manufacturing sector pick up the slack and absorb excess domestic demand for essential items due to the decreased imports during the shutdown and closure of our borders. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we achieved during the last couple of years, Mr. Speaker, was that we were successfully able to negotiate the third edition of Article 164 under the CARICOM Treaty. In 2019, the Ministry of Commerce, after extensive consultation, was able to implement the regime in St. Lucia in January 2020. This edition, Mr. Speaker, provides tariff protection to 14 product groups across 49 tariff lines, with additional programs of support to be developed under CARICOM Treaty. What this means, Mr. Speaker, is that over 17 of our manufacturing companies has benefited across multiple sectors, including food and beverage, animal food supplies, chemical and gases, which includes paint and oxygen, and also, Mr. Speaker, what we do here with residential solar water heating. We also saw major expansion of two of our major manufacturing entities. Mr. Speaker, the tariff protection through the implementation of Article 164 resulted in marked increase in domestic sales, and this, Mr. Speaker, has demonstrated sufficient potential our manufacturers to be able to supply the domestic market with also the ability to supply regional exports. Mr. Speaker, the Fiscal Incentive Act, as we know, is the primary legislation governing the award of incentives to manufacturers or processing industries. Fiscal incentives, as you know, were introduced to facilitate local and foreign investment in the productive sector of our economy. The Act was developed in 1974 and offers a range of incentives to manufacturing entities. And this includes, Mr. Speaker, tax incentives for up to a maximum of 15 years, waiver of import duties on imported plant machinery and equipment, and waiver of import duties on imported raw and packaging materials. In that context, Mr. Speaker, the regime speaks to the provision of assistance to entities involved in the manufacturing of goods as opposed to industries in general. As government focus has evolved over the years in line with the changing global business climate, the Fiscal Incentive Act in its previous form diminished in relevance to St. Lucia's strategic and developmental goals. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the Act did not allow sufficient flexibility that would enable the private sector to take advantage of emerging opportunities and trends, particularly on markets offered through the European Partnership Agreement, EPA, which caters to our service providers, goods and manufacturers, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, what we identified was the inherent 15-year maximum term was a deterrent for many of our manufacturing entities that had reached maturity. And in the event that they were considering expansion, they were limited in what they could have requested from government. It is for this reason, Mr. Speaker, that the Fiscal Incentive Act was amended. The amendment to the Act made the legislation more robust and reflect the current dynamics of our country. With the extension of the tax holiday, these mature manufacturers can benefit from additional tax relief for further expansion. Mr. Speaker, as a result of the reform to the Fiscal Incentive Act, coupled with the support provided to our manufacturing sector, the sector grew by 8.6% in 2019 compared to 0.7% in 2015. The output of the manufacturing sector increased, Mr. Speaker, also by 20.6% from 281.9 million in 2015 to 340.1 million in 2019. Mr. Speaker, it is also extremely commendable to note that jobs created in the sector moved from 4,937 in 2015 to 5,867 at the end of the first quarter in 2020. This is an additional 930 jobs created in the sector. What this means, Mr. Speaker, is that the manufacturing sector now contributes 7.6% of the jobs in this country, compared to just 4.6% 5 years ago. We must also be mindful, Mr. Speaker, that reflective of the renewed confidence in the sector, the commercial bank's stock of credit to the sector moved from 66.1 million in 2015 to 77.8 million in 2019, an increase of 11.7 million. Mr. Speaker, the above achievements are a result of a 60.7 million in waiver of custom duties to 146 enterprises under the fiscal incentive regime by this government. Significant support being given to our manufacturing sector, Mr. Speaker. So when we hear, Mr. Speaker, as to what is being done to our local enterprise, this speaks to it, Mr. Speaker. Significant waivers. Mr. Speaker, I want to take the opportunity to highlight the manufacturing of wheat flour, which is one of the essential commodities controlled and subsidized by the government. Mr. Speaker, when I assumed office in 2016, St. Lucia relied solely on regional suppliers for wheat flour. Immediately upon assuming the role as minister responsible for enterprise development, the local flour mill became operational, and for the first time, Mr. Speaker, our local bakers and other users of wheat flour received their supplies from a domestic producer, Caribbean Grains, located in Vieux-Fort. In 2016, Mr. Speaker, this company supplied just 25%, which is 50,100 pound bags of St. Lucia's demand for flour. Mr. Speaker, this company occupies 51% of the market share for flour and supplied 110,100 pound bags of flour to the domestic market in 2020. Mr. Speaker, flour is central to our baking sector, and it plays a vital role in supplying freshly baked bread and related products consumed by most households in St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, my ministry recognized that this important sector was on the verge of being extinct due to one, an aging crop of bakers, obsolete equipment, and lack of resources. My ministry has partnered with the revamped Bakers Association to preserve our bread and butter. Mr. Speaker, my government continues to subsidize flour sold to our bakers by $12 on every 100-pound bag of flour. This subsidy was increased by an additional $5, Mr. Speaker. And the subsidy is now $17 between July to December 2020. And this, Mr. Speaker, was particularly to cushion the impact of the pandemic and reduce the import cost to our bakers as they struggle to stay afloat. This relief for a 6-month period from July 1st to December 31st, 2020 amounted to EC $669,494 and benefited 49 bakers, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to report that the total subsidy on flour during the period 2016 to 2020 amounted to $13.3 million, assisting our local baking sector. Mr. Speaker, recently, my government approved a subvention to the Bakers Association to facilitate training in new techniques, knowledge sharing, and general support to facilitate the continuity of the baking sector. St. Lucia has approximately 54 bakeries, a majority of which are micro and small businesses employing about 343 persons. Mr. Speaker, through the support provided to our local bakers, they were able to expand operations to meet local demands. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we saw a 32% reduction in the value of imported flour products from $3.9 million in 2019 to $2.7 million in 2020, a reduction of $1.3 million. This is money remaining in our local economy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in addition, as we speak, my ministry is concurrently working with the Accountant General's Department to facilitate the payment of bulk flour supplied to our bakers in the South. As it is right now, Mr. Speaker, the bakers in the South have to come up to the North to purchase flour at the government warehouse. We are currently working on an initiative which we believe is worthy of mention because we do all of that, Mr. Speaker, to try to enhance the ease of doing business for all sectors. Mr. Speaker, the expansion of the services sector has been a priority for this government. This sector combined accounts for over 60% of St. Lucia's GDP. Hence, to propel growth in this sector, this government, after 1 year of assuming office, approved the services sector policy, strategy, and action plan. The adoption of this policy greenlighted a clear strategy towards the development of key service subsectors in St. Lucia, namely the creative industries, information and communication technology, professional services, and spa and wellness. As part of the implementation of the approved strategy, Cabinet approved amendments to the Fiscal Incentive Act, allowing enterprises within the targeted subsectors to benefit from duty-free concessions on plant, equipment, machinery, and raw materials. The government took a proactive approach to private sector development by anticipating the evolving needs of the business community in non-traditional areas, such as tertiary education, health, medical tourism. Despite setbacks presented by the ongoing pandemic, Mr. Speaker, the expansion of the fiscal incentives to service-related industries has thus far resulted in 13 approved applications through my ministry. 4 of these falling under the professional service category and 9 under the ICT sector. 2 out of the 4 professional service sectors approved were medical facilities. Over the past years, an additional 17 micro and small-scale enterprises in the services sector benefited from concessions through the Micro and Small Business Act. 8 were from the professional services sector, and 3 from the medical dental services, and 5 printing and publishing. This shows a trend towards more service-based entities, and we expect this trend to continue due to the restructuring of business operations during this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, since the enactment of the reform in 2019, this ministry, through Export St. Lucia, has been working with music artists, designers, and freelance animators towards showcasing their talent on the international market. This has resulted, Mr. Speaker, in record export sales, and I want to make mention of one particular designer, Christine Samuel of Christie Creations, who received an award for excellence in fashion and innovation. Mr. Speaker, as a testament to our support to the service sector and to diversify our economy, my government has recently approved an annual subvention to the St. Lucian Fashion Council to lend support to our fashion designers. We are going places, Mr. Speaker, that has never gone, governments have never gone before. We are supporting sectors that have never been supported before, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am a strong believer of the saying, God help those who help themselves. And the Caribbean Development Bank, recognizing our own efforts to boost the creative industry sector, approved in February 2020 US $30,000 to improve the branding and marketing of St. Lucia's Carnival, including the artists and music associated with the event. And we all know about the Denry segment, Mr. Speaker, and how they have benefited from various stores that we have promoted, attending carnivals in Trinidad, Miami, Canada, and the UK. Mr. Speaker, my ministry remains thankful to the business support organization, such as the St. Lucia Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture, the St. Lucia Manufacturers Association, St. Lucia Coalition of Service Industries, the Southern Business Association, the St. Lucia Industrial and Small Business Association, and last but not least, the Bakers Association for their role in assisting business enterprise to flourish. Your vital support to the business community cannot be overemphasized. Mr. Speaker, my ministry is also responsible for consumer affairs, and this includes the education and as well as the well-being of consumers. My ministry collaborates and supports the National Consumer Association with an annual subvention, and that is to protect the rights and interests of consumers and educate them to make informed purchasing decisions. We continue to investigate consumer complaints, and out of the 174 consumer complaints during my tenure, 152 have been resolved amicably with total cash compensation of $84,222.26. It is significant that although the total value of the complaints which have been addressed may seem small, it is the positive impact which the resolution has had on the complainant. And I owe this to the cadre of hardworking and dedicated staff to the Consumer Affairs Department. Mr. Speaker, I'm making an appeal to all consumers that should you have any questions or queries regarding the purchase of goods and services from any business establishment, that the officers of the Consumer Affairs Department are waiting and willing to assist you. And I think it's important that I should also advise the general public of our new location, which is at the corner of Miku and Coral Street, which is a lot easier access to consumers. Mr. Speaker, I am also pleased to report that we have maintained an effective procurement system at the government supply warehouse for bulk rice, sugar, and flour, which are basic staples consumed by the populace. Despite fluctuations in world prices and the debilitating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, Mr. Speaker, not once did we increase the price of any of these commodities, or was there any significant short supply of these commodities. We have maintained the price, Mr. Speaker, of a 1 pound of brown sugar at $1, 1 pound of wheat flour at $1, 1 pound of refined sugar at $1.10, and 1 pound of rice at $1.25. And my ministry, Mr. Speaker, continues to make donations on an annual basis to non-profit organizations such as schools, churches, elderly homes to feed the less fortunate. And last year, Mr. Speaker, to cushion the impact of COVID-19, we contributed 560 bags of rice, 520 bags of brown sugar, and 540 bags of flour to NEMO to cater to the needs of the most vulnerable, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that cares for the welfare of our people. Mr. Speaker, despite all of the donations and the subsidies that we continue to make, we do not use a cent from the consolidated fund to purchase these commodities. Instead, we search diligently and employ excellent negotiating skills to secure the best price for commodities, and the gains are passed on to our people by way of subsidies, donations, and the creation of employment for 27 employees at the government supply warehouse. This is a true representation, Mr. Speaker, of the economies of scale. We, as a department, as a ministry, continue to monitor and control the prices of other goods, which includes milk, peas, beans, onions, potatoes, tuna fish, and cement, to ensure the affordability by the lowest income groups in our society. Mr. Speaker, I say all this because there are several ways to protect the vulnerable. Several ways. Mr. Speaker, I wish to focus on fuel for a minute, which is also a controlled and essential commodity. International oil prices in 2015 were on an upward trend. And while the price dipped around February of 2016, international prices increased at a progressive rate in the latter part of 2016 through to 2019, peaking at US $75.30 per barrel in August 2018. Around April last year, oil prices plummeted, reaching minus US $47.63 per barrel, but has since been climbing and is now about US $61 per barrel. Despite the volatility in the prices of oil per barrel on the international market, fuel excise tax rates in St. Lucia remain fixed at $4 per imperial gallon for gasoline and diesel for the period 2016 up to June 2017. However, Mr. Speaker, thereafter, the price of oil continued to trend upwards, and this government, mindful of the imminent impact on this on consumers, adjusted the excise tax below the $4 per gallon to as low as $3.05 and $2.24 per gallon for diesel and gasoline, respectively, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, despite the volatility on international oil prices, this government never once breached the established retail price cap of $13.95 per gallon. My government continues to subsidize 20-pound and 22-pound cylinders of cooking gas. For example, last year, the average price of a 20-pound cylinder was $36.77, and the average subsidy was $8.69 per cylinder. Without this subsidy, Mr. Speaker, the cost of a 20-pound cylinder would have been $45.46. Mr. Speaker, this resulted in a $7.1 million in subsidy on cooking gas. This is what my government is doing to help the vulnerable, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the issue of access to finance by our MSMEs, no matter the credit worthiness, is not new to this Honorable House. Many small businesses cannot access loans to buy equipment, to restock, to keep their doors open, and to make the payroll, much less pay the government taxes. It is for this reason that as part of St. Lucia's Economic Recovery and Resilience Plan, to mitigate the imminent impact of this pandemic, the government, through its interventions, focused on strategies that would provide much-needed support to our MSMEs through access to finance. To this end, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to report the following. The government has incentivized the commercial banking sector to provide financing to medium, small, and micro enterprises by offering the sector a waiver of corporate income tax against interest income on loans provided by MSMEs. The government has repurposed US $3.1 million or EC $8.1 million under the Climate Adaptation Facility, CAF, to lend to small businesses focusing on food security and digital technologies. To date, Mr. Speaker, there have been 112 inquiries and $1.6 million has been approved. This initiative is being implemented by the St. Lucia Development Bank. $5 million has been earmarked to lend to small businesses under the Working Capital Injection Program, and an additional US $4 million from the CDB on concessionary terms have been earmarked for lending to households to diversify into small and micro enterprise and cottage industries. This, Mr. Speaker, will be implemented by Belfund. Mr. Speaker, my ministry continues to collaborate with the banking sector, and I wish to applaud, Mr. Speaker, the First National Bank for establishing an MSME competency unit in the first quarter of 2020, and the Bank of St. Lucia and First National Bank for participating in the Eastern Caribbean Partial Credit Guarantee Corporation program. Under this facility, Mr. Speaker, the ECPCGC will guarantee 75% of the loans, thus mitigating the risk and allowing more MSMEs to be approved for loan funding. Mr. Speaker, to further assist our business community, especially our MSMEs, to assess much-needed finance, some critical reforms are being undertaken. Upon assuming office, we embarked on the drafting of some major pieces of legislation that will change the landscape of doing business in St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, the credit reporting bill went to Parliament for the first reading last year. The purpose of this bill is to provide a fair and accurate credit reporting system with the financial system in order to ensure objective credit decisions. This bill, once enacted, will enable credit information sharing and reporting and provide for a single space in the regulation of credit reporting. Mr. Speaker, credit bureaus play an important role in economic growth and stability, housing a wealth of information that helps credit providers to be more responsible in their lending practices. This will not only speed up the process for obtaining credit, but will help consumers and businesses ensure that they do not overextend themselves by obtaining credit they cannot afford. Because credit bureaus dramatically reduce the cost of assessing the risk of new borrowers, this will encourage entry by new lenders, resulting in greater competition, which lowers the cost of credit. Mr. Speaker, I wish to speak on business registration and what the ministry continues to do. I am particularly motivated by our local investors and their continued confidence in our governance, leadership, and by extension, our economy. Prior to assuming office in 2016, the number of enterprises registered in St. Lucia stood at 1,178 registrations. At the end of 2020, the number of businesses registration increased by 32%, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this achievement was no accident, but a reflection of the dedication and commitment of the Small Business Development Center within my ministry. On average, during the period 2016 to 2020, approximately 70% of the business registrations were done by the business development officers within this unit, and this is done at a fraction of the cost to investors. Whereas the private fee for the registration of a business name is in the region of $1,000, with the intervention of my ministry, a business name registration costs only $157.50. Under the Entrepreneurial Development Program, the Small Business Development Center has facilitated many training sessions over the past few years. And this, Mr. Speaker, has equipped small businesses with the requisite financial and management capabilities to operate their businesses and meet the requirements of financial institutions and regulatory agencies. This, Mr. Speaker, would not have been possible because of their limited resources. Mr. Speaker, just so you can appreciate the number of training sessions we've had and the number of persons trained, I would just wish to highlight training in various workshops, which included business planning. In 2019, Mr. Speaker, we trained 26 people. Design thinking, 2019 to 2020, we trained 49 people. Micro business game, 2019 to 2020, we trained 109 people. And business startup essentials, Mr. Speaker, we trained 470 people, a total of 640 persons having been trained by the ministry, Mr. Speaker. I'm hoping, Mr. Speaker, that this dismisses, Mr. Speaker, the assertion that this government is not doing anything to help small businesses. Mr. Speaker, I wish to move to some of the other statutory agencies under my purview. Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards. The Ministry recognizes that without proper standards, we will not be able to achieve market penetration to enable our products to be seen on international markets. Hence, the Ministry, through the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards, partnered with 2 new international agencies and participated in the work of over 25 international and regional technical committees aimed at improving international standards involvement. As a result, the rate of standards adopted increased from an average of 6% per annum over the period 2020-2016 to an average of 35% per annum over the period 2016 to 2020, with the majority representing the adoption of identical international standards, which immediately gives access to international trade specifications. The number of new standards adopted in 2016 was 174. By 2020, the number of new standards adopted was 526, which represented 202% increase in new standards adopted. The Metrology Laboratory was awarded accreditation to ISO IEC 17025-2017, and that's a requirement for GENAC for mass and volume, Mr. Speaker. This laboratory has demonstrated competence at providing a calibration service in mass calibration. This makes St. Lucia the first calibration laboratory within the English-speaking countries in the OECS to receive ISO IEC 1725-2017 accreditation in November 2020, Mr. Speaker. The new National Agriculture Diagnostic Facility at Union Castries was officially opened on Thursday, December 10, 2020. The facility, funded with the assistance of the European Union and the government of St. Lucia, houses laboratories, including a metrology lab, that will provide scientific support to the agricultural sector and other sectors of the economy, which includes health, manufacturing, construction, and tourism. The Bureau, for the first time in 2020, issued a calibration certificate for weights belonging to the National Forensic Laboratory. This certificate met the requirement of the international standard ISO IEC 1725-2017. Over the past 5 years, Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Bureau of Standards implemented new programs and continued working on others. As such, during the period under review, electrical safety testing equipment for electrical appliances continued with improvements in the program. Under this scheme, electrical appliances imported into and sold into St. Lucia are tested against requirements outlined in the 18 national compulsory electrical safety standards. A total of 10,505 appliances were tested during this period. New and used tire inspection. Tire inspection during the reported period saw the inspection of approximately 512,910 tires. 170,000 were used and 342,852 new tires. The department also investigated and resolved 93 customer complaints. As part of the market surveillance program, the inspectorate inspected 7,650 labels and 340 retail outlets. Mr. Speaker, I would like to speak to another agency, which is the Trade Export Promotion Agency, now known as Export St. Lucia. And with this name change, not only came an increased focus on increasing aggregate exports, but also export development. Mr. Speaker, the CMOS industry has a great opportunity for growth, as CMOS is increasingly being recognized worldwide as having significant nutritional, energy, and health benefits. After suffering a lull, the industry has come back with the assistance of Export St. Lucia, working with the Prale and the Opicon CMOS Association to enhance the value chain for a sustainable CMOS product. Mr. Speaker, The agency has been assisting the association identify markets for its CMOS, and over 400 CMOS farmers in Poale and Opicon have returned to planting CMOS after abandoning the sector due to a lack of a market. We have also seen increasing employment in other districts such as Vieux-Fort and Labrie, specifically among young people who have commenced new CMOS businesses. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, in 2019, the revenue for CMOS sale was EC 500,000. And by 2020, Mr. Speaker, that revenue grew to EC $4.6 million. That's a significant, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my ministry will continue to seek new overseas markets for the St. Lucia CMOS, which is gradually becoming an international household name, thereby creating greater employment opportunities for our youth, especially in rural communities. Mr. Speaker, Export St. Lucia, with its renewed focus, has also assisted a number of other agencies and individuals penetrate the US, Canada, and UK markets, boasting exports in agricultural products such as bananas, plantain, and breadfruit. This achievement resulted from a series of workshops on exporting to the USA to meet US standards, as well as expositions and market familiarization tours. Mr. Speaker, to sustain these successes, we have had to continually work collaboratively with the Ministry of Agriculture to ensure that there is a consistent supply of these products for export. Through the Internal Brand Export Program, 5 exporters, namely Viking Traders, Fruitsy Foods, Rainforest Foods, Wilwy's Agro Processing Limited, and Ange's Cocoa Sticks, are now able to display their products in a Caribbean store in the UK. In addition to picking up the slack in the domestic market during the lockdown last year, several companies exported to new markets, such as St. Vincent, Dominica, Guadeloupe, and Martinique. These include Chemico, Tolin, Forest Springs, and Abbey's Exotics. Export St. Lucia witnessed improvement in exports to the OECS and CARICOM, which have now become markets of renewed interest. Domestic exports of consumer goods, Mr. Speaker, which includes food, beverages, manufactured goods, and articles, have increased by 12.5% from 77.6 million in 2018 to 87.3 million in 2019. I also wish, Mr. Speaker, to recognize Baron Foods, a company synonymous with high quality and standards, for its first shipment of condiments to Russia. They currently export to 25 countries worldwide and has often penetrated new and difficult markets, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these successes did not happen overnight. The government in 2019 officially endorsed a national export strategy for St. Lucia, and this was particularly to increase the volume and value of exports. Export St. Lucia has been coordinating the structured activities at no cost to our exporters and fully funded by the government of St. Lucia. Our exporters have benefited from capacity building initiatives, which includes Export Competitiveness Symposium, Shipping and Logistics for Export Workshop, Digital Marketing Symposium, Export and Energy Workshop, Exporting to the USA, Specialty Caribbean Expo, Shipping and Logistics for Export, Intellectual Property Workshop, Post-Harvest Management for Breadfruit Workshop. Mr. Speaker, my government appreciates that a country's greatest assets is its human resource, and thus the great focus on capacity building.
Honourable Member, you have 15 minutes in which to complete your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess what I'm not able to address, I will address at our next sitting. Mr. Speaker, I now move to the St. Lucia Free Zone. Mr. Speaker, I just want to indicate that since the establishment of the Free Zone in the year 2000, Mr. Speaker, for the first time in 2020, the Free Zone saw a 100% occupancy rate. So, Mr. Speaker, in that quest to promote investment opportunities, we are currently considering the construction of additional buildings for that purpose. We recognize, Mr. Speaker, and we're getting quite a bit of interest from various entities, also, Mr. Speaker, BPOs to establish in St. Lucia. And that says a lot with regards to what this government is doing currently, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll quickly move, Mr. Speaker, to the development of a cannabis industry. Two attempts were made in the past to set up a commission to drive the process, which is a cannabis industry. Invest St. Lucia took the lead on the third attempt and ensured the commission fulfilled its mandate. The economic analysis of the cannabis industry shows that the enforcement cost of the current legal framework is high and ineffective at curtailing the use of cannabis. The Cannabis Commission held various consultations island-wide and a multiple of virtual consultations soliciting feedback from every sector stakeholder in society and ensuring their concerns were addressed in the development of a policy framework for the industry. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to report that after extensive consultation, that the draft legislative framework and regulatory impact assessment has been completed for the reformation of laws for the cannabis industry. The legislative drafting unit at the Attorney General Chambers is currently working on the draft bill to be presented to Cabinet. I was very happy to hear that the Leader of the Opposition did indicate that as a government, they would support the legislative changes to support a cannabis industry, Mr. Speaker. But I was also reminded that he was also part of a government where a former Attorney General indicated that not over his dead body would we ever see any growth in the cannabis industry. Mr. Speaker, the cannabis industry will generate employment, boost the economy, bring in revenue for the government of St. Lucia, while lifting the burdens of the prison system, as simple possession of cannabis will no longer be an indictable offense. Mr. Speaker, I'll quickly move to matters pertaining to my constituency, although I do intend to elaborate a little more when we come to the policy debate. Under heading 43, Mr. Speaker, Ministry of Infrastructure, Strozel Roads Rehabilitation, Mr. Speaker. I wish, Mr. Speaker, to indicate that while the Saltibus Road has taken quite a bit of time to completion, we now recognize, Mr. Speaker, that the end is near. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the residents, particularly the transport drivers, Mr. Speaker, for their patience during the period of the road rehabilitation. It's been a long road, Mr. Speaker, but it is something that they have been awaiting for many, many years. And I do urge them to be cautious, Mr. Speaker, and don't be tempted by what is now considered to be a highway. Mr. Speaker, as we speak on roads, Mr. Speaker, we are also seeing the development of the Gayabwa-Opak Road, a road, Mr. Speaker, that has been long forgotten. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the residents of the community normally consider that the communities are forgotten communities, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the promises I made was that I would have addressed the conditions of that road because it's an area that I like to drive, Mr. Speaker. The scenery is exceptional. And, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to announce that work has started, Mr. Speaker, and very soon the people will get a very, very exceptional quality of road, Mr. Speaker. What we have coming next, Mr. Speaker, is the rehabilitation and the complete makeover of the Dibrel-Mortet Road, Mr. Speaker. The road has already been mapped and assessed, and very soon we will see work being commenced on that road, Mr. Speaker. Under Mr. Speaker, Head 56, DVRP, Mr. Speaker. I'm very, very pleased, Mr. Speaker, that after a very, very long wait, Mr. Speaker, and something that I have announced in this House before, that finally, Mr. Speaker, the tenders have gone out. In fact, I think they were supposed to have been open today, but for some reason they've been pushed back for next week. but the tenders have gone out and have been completed for the construction of the Roblo Community Center and for the PI Community Center, Mr. Speaker. These are two facilities, Mr. Speaker, that the people have long been awaiting, Mr. Speaker. And just to give a brief description, Mr. Speaker, they're both going to be two-story structures, Mr. Speaker, catering for the disabled. And we expect that the construction period to be no more than 12 months. So, Mr. Speaker, that is something that the residents of the various communities have long been awaiting for. I'm also pleased, Mr. Speaker, that tenders have also gone out for the PI Bridge. This is a bridge, Mr. Speaker, that was not supposed to have continued after the destruction of the hurricane. I cannot quite remember which hurricane it was, but it's a while back that this bridge has been in existence. It has served the people of PI well and surrounding areas, but the time has come, Mr. Speaker, where we now have to recognize the development in the Choiseul community as well and ensure that we have a bridge that can maintain two-way traffic, Mr. Speaker. So I'm very pleased that very soon we will be seeing the construction of that bridge, and the construction period is no more than 14 months, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move to head 520251, major repairs, rehabilitation of our schools, Mr. Speaker. Over the years, Mr. Speaker, and continuing in this budget, we continue to see focus on repairing our school plans. I have continuously said that the Choiseul Saltibus community is the community with the most schools, Mr. Speaker, and so I'm always extremely happy to recognize the recognition of the deplorable condition of some of the schools, Mr. Speaker, over the years, and we've had to maintain significant toilet blocks, classrooms, roof, tiling. Significant work has gone into all of our schools, Mr. Speaker, and we continue to do them under the allocation under school rehabilitation, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the troubling situations we have in the community is the situation of the fish pond in Choiseul, and I move to head 41. Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Head 41890322, building resilience for adaptation, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the fish pond in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, it is continuously to be a heartbreaking situation, recognizing what the fishermen of the Choiseul community have to go through when they have to bring their boats out on a morning and come back in on an evening, Mr. Speaker, because of the continuous buildup of sun. We recognize, Mr. Speaker, that the Japanese had already closed the book on this situation. I thank the Minister of Agriculture when he came in. We discussed it and we were successfully able to renegotiate with the Japanese, Mr. Speaker, to the point where we were all invited to Japan to see models of what that will solve this problem for us, Mr. Speaker. And that work should have started, Mr. Speaker, last year. Unfortunately, because of COVID, the people from Japan could not have come down. They had made one promise, and because of the second wave, that also had to be postponed, Mr. Speaker. But I'm very pleased that we actually have a meeting, face-to-face meeting, scheduled for Tuesday next week, Mr. Speaker, to identify the way forward in addressing that situation, which is critical for our fishermen in Choiseul, Mr. Speaker. So I'm very happy with regards to that development. Mr. Speaker, with regard ahead 54, line 024, Mr. Speaker, national sporting and infrastructure. One of the challenges when you have a very big community like the one I represent is the number of public facilities you have to deal with. And Choiseul also has the most playing fields, Mr. Speaker. But we are tackling them one by one, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that they have the facilities that are required. As we speak, Mr. Speaker, work is ongoing on the Lafargue playing field, where they are regrassing it, Mr. Speaker. I know there's a lot of talk about, you know, the artificial turf and everything, but the people of Choiseul said they wanted to remain with their grass facility. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, you know, I follow the wills of the people when it comes to that. So, Mr. Speaker, work is ongoing, Mr. Speaker, and we have one of the best, I think it's called curators, Mr. Crafton, who's actually working on our field. And we will see, Mr. Speaker, not just the view that you get from that field, but, you know, the exceptional reception that Choiseul people give you. We see this field as being one of the fields where quite a bit of work quite a bit of games, Mr. Speaker, will be taking place. Mr. Speaker, there's a lot more as it relates to work happening in my community, which we will speak to in the policy decision. But in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell the people of St. Lucia that our work is not over. When we entered office in 2016, St. Lucia's economic growth rate was at 0.1%, and prior to the pandemic, we were well on our way to achieving our cumulative growth target of 12% in the first term. However, Mr. Speaker, the pandemic hit and several persons have lost their jobs. Businesses have had to close. Business activity have come to a halt, Mr. Speaker. But I want to assure the business community that the focus of my government over the short term is not only to rebuild the economy, but to rebuild it stronger and more resilient than it was prior to this pandemic. Our focus will be on building an economy that is not just recovering, but is prospering and thriving. This government believes that the true engine of job creation and economic expansion in this country is through entrepreneurship, innovation, and small business development. It is for this reason that the government will continue to provide relief to diversify the economy and grow small businesses, spreading a culture of entrepreneurship and promoting local and foreign investment. Business as usual won't work, not in this environment. Our partners are playing to gain first place, Mr. Speaker. We cannot just sit down. We are facing competition everywhere and in everything. So I urge leaders of the business community to keep alive a sense of seriousness to the challenges and a sense of common purpose. Gone are the days when governments, businesses, and citizens are scattered in our thoughts and actions. We need to think of the greater good, which is prosperity to all. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Speaker, I beg that we suspend the House for 15 minutes.
Honorable members, the question is that the House will stand suspended for the next 15 minutes. As many as are of that opinion say aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. House is suspended.
All right.
Well, welcome back to our live broadcast of the afternoon session of the debate on the expenditure, on the revenue or expenditure for the year 2020-2021. The House now has been suspended for 15 minutes, and so the members will depart for, as I said, 15 minutes, and then the House will again recommence the session. There have been a few number of presentations by members on both sides. Lisa, perhaps you can enlighten us
certainly, yes,
some of the presentations made.
Yes, we have seen some spirited presentations being made. We had the Honorable Sean Edward, who opened up as we came in for the second session for today, and we also just heard from Honorable Bradley Felix, and just to give a summation of the presentation by Honorable Bradley Felix, he spoke to the repurposing of a loan, 3.1 million US dollars under the CAF program, and that is for onward lending primers to small businesses. And already there has been $1.6 million approved to individuals applying. There's also an allocation of $5 million for additionally for small businesses, and another $4 million US dollars for households, and to get into the cottage industry. That's going to be administered by Bell Fund. Quite interesting programs there, especially for the cottage industry, if I must, because we know that a number of people have lost their jobs due to COVID-19. And so by now making financing available for individuals to perhaps take a passion of theirs and turn it into a revenue earning avenue is something that needs to be commended.
Surely, I'm sure that this is good news for a number of small businesses, and in this time of this pandemic, serious pandemic challenges that we are facing, that this relief is coming in at an opportune time. Monsieur Madame, ce qui a fait après ça, c'est sûr qu'elle a pris un 15 minutes pause avec côté les membres qui ont chasse posée pour discuter et qui ont vu après ça pour continuer la session pour chicken à ce budget l'année ça qui est au billion 638 millions 600 900 dollars. Et je veux dire, c'est le premier jour en discussion et que ça va continuer pour le reste de la semaine. Quand les ministre qui nous pour le commerce, Honorable Bradley Felix, fallait assurer diverses assistances pour place de business dans le temps qui est sécurité. Lisa, I don't know if you wish to comment on some of the some information that we have before us. I don't know if you care to spend some time on this.
And before we get to that information quickly, just to also mention that one thing, Prime Minister, that has been a hot topic in the public is the cannabis and whether it will be decriminalized or legalized, because we know a lot of work has gone into the foundation of decriminalizing cannabis here, and the Minister, Honorable Bradley Felix, did indicate that the government is moving on that, and there is legislation that is going to come into effect to usher in the cannabis industry for St. Lucia. So the cannabis bill will establish the authority responsible for issuing licenses for the possession, supply, and use of cannabis. And there will also be special provisions will govern the use of cannabis for religious purposes. The bill will also address the purchase, distribution, and the selling of cannabis, and will also prohibit the use in specified circumstances. So lots of movement happening there, and I would imagine that the cannabis bill will be coming perhaps later on in the year.
Okay, there's a press release coming from the Department of Health and Wellness, Lisa. The heading goes, maintenance of public health measures after first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. It goes as like this: the Ministry of Health and Wellness commenced rollout of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine on February 17, 2021. As of March 15, 2021, over 19,000 people have received the first dose of this vaccine. The Ministry of Health and Wellness is encouraged thus far by the interest shown and the uptake of the vaccine by our citizens and residents. The vaccine is provided on a voluntary basis, and I'll take that again. The vaccine is provided on a voluntary basis and free of charge to the public. We will continue to provide accurate information about the AstraZeneca vaccine to the public to ensure informed decisions are made to keep our families safe from COVID-19, according to the interim recommendations by WHO dated February 10, 2021. This vaccine has an efficacy of 70.4% against symptomatic SARS-CoV-2 infection. This is after both doses are received. The vaccine prevents the complicated form of the disease, hospitalizations and death from COVID-19 in 100% of persons who receive both doses. The public is therefore reminded that with one dose, we are not fully covered as yet. Also, we need between 70 to 80% of our population to be covered with both doses to get the full benefit. This translates to over 126,000 people being vaccinated.
And the promise we do have today, the amendments to the protocols coming into effect. That's the amendment and the COVID-19 Prevention and Control Bill, and printed in the St. Lucia Gazette, the extraordinary issue of the Gazette, today, Wednesday, March 17, 2021. And the statutory instrument number 59. And in exercise, it reads, in exercise of the power conferred under Section 16 of the COVID-19 Prevention and Control Act, number 9 of 2020, the Minister responsible for health makes this order. This order may be cited as the COVID-19 Prevention and Control Prohibition of Assembly number 3 order for 2021. Restriction on social activities. A person shall not host or attend a mass crowd event, a competitive or high-contact sporting activity, including indoor and outdoor training and local competitions. A social event, except with no more than 10 persons of his or her immediate family, with no loud music, and in the case of the nighttime boat excursion for crewed yacht charters and family boaters, with prior notice of the excursion plan being given to the lighthouse before the journey. And also, this section does not prevent a person from training and exercising, whether indoor or outdoor, through gym workouts if the physical distancing protocols specified under the COVID-19 Prevention and Control physical distancing order are complied with. Also, an athlete from participating in one-on-one coaching or training for non-contact sports, including tennis and swimming. We also have a primus for the faith-based organizations there. That an organization, a faith-based organization, may hold a daily or regular religious ceremony if the physical distancing protocol specified under the physical distancing order is complied with within the square footage of the faith-based organization. You also the faith-based organization shall not hold special religious rites, including baptisms, weddings, and funerals, by physical attendance unless there are no more than 50 persons in attendance. So, for the purpose of that section primus, sometimes we don't. We all have our different interpretations of what certain phrases mean. So, it is specified here that for the purpose of the section, immediate family household in relation to an individual means the spouse, child, relative, or other person living with that individual. So immediate family doesn't mean your cousin who's perhaps living 6 doors down. So also, special event includes a birthday celebration, a retirement celebration, a marriage celebration, a wake, a beach picnic, or a river party. It also does not include a chartered daytime boat excursion. And we know we had a lot of parties over the holiday season, and so the authorities wanted to make it very clear when they say social event exactly what they are referring to. And the order expires on the 16th day of April 2021. So you have the amendments there to the protocols that guide us as we continue to manage and mitigate COVID-19. We also have the curfew, which has been adjusted to now 7 p.m. That should be from 7 p.m. To 9 p.m. So we're now at 9 p.m.
Effective today, is it?
Effective today, Wednesday, 17th March. It is now 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. And so that gives a little more latitude for farmers.
Of course it
So
does.
for individuals, because I know one thing that has always been difficult is being able to get transportation. Public transportation has been very difficult for individuals, especially trying to get home on an evening. And so that the curfew time, the curfew period, whether, when it was at 7 p.m., a lot of people found it difficult for them to be able to catch a bus and get home in good time. And so perhaps the 9 p.m. would better accommodate that.
Definitely facilitate.
Yes, would better accommodate that. And so, as with the government has encouraged businesses to ensure that they can help the workers to get home in good time as well. So what we will do now, we will head back to studio for a short break as we await the recommencement of the afternoon session of the debate on the estimates of revenue and expenditure. Mr. Joseph alongside Primus Hutchinson will be back shortly.